one.
All right. So when I started teaching, like I said, I was in the library. I had kindergarten through sixth grade classes. And then after that, I went into the special education classroom. And so all of my classroom strategies really came from my SPED classes in my master's degree. And as I started working with kids, as I started working with other teachers, I just found that there were some things that worked across the board. Most of my teaching career was in middle school and high school. And so when I started teaching and facilitating for teachers, I had a lot of elementary teachers. And so my experiences didn't seem to quite uh, match what I thought they were experiencing. But the more that I've done this, the more that I talk to teachers, the more that I'm in with new teachers and veteran teachers, there are just some classroom management strategies that work across the board. And so the first thing I want to talk about is prevention. Um, I don't feel like I can stress enough. I almost put the title of this prevention, 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 because repetition is helpful. But you want to create a learning environment where everyone feels safe to share their ideas, make mistakes, and learn from each other. This is most easily created by structure and engagement. So the first thing when we look at prevention for me is creating relationships. Dr. Turner, you were talking earlier about knowing George and knowing that if I gave him an academic task or an academic speech topic that he was going to choose, he would choose to take the zero. And so your relationship with him informed you on how to engage him in the lessons that you had for him, engage him in the learning that you needed to see from him. And so the first thing, and you're going to hear it all throughout your college career. And when you get into the school, some schools say your why. You know, what is the why have you gotten into teaching? Most of us don't get into teaching for the money. Most of us don't get into teaching to help with behaviors. Most of us get into teaching because we want to support kids. Maybe there was a teacher that made you feel seen and heard, and you want to be that for someone else. With prevention, again, relationship is key, even with your middle school and high school kids. That may not look like, you know, those fun TikTok videos where, you know, they're giving high fives or a hug or a little dance as they walk in the room. But one of the number one things that you can do is learn your kids' names. That was a goal of mine, was to have all of my kids' names memorized in the first week. I did that by using seating charts. And by having individual conversations with them. Everything I did in the first 2 weeks was just to get to know my kids, find out what makes them tick, find out what they're dealing with at home. Again, they're not going to trust you right away. So, especially with high schoolers, a lot of it is just using humor. I'm not a funny person, but they can think I'm funny just because I can make a mistake and be okay with it. So prevention, relationships. Also, I'm going to go over engagement strategies. There's a little link on the infographic and in the link that Dr. Turner is going to share with you about some engagement strategies. A lot of times we don't think of engagement as prevention, but if we have a kid thinking, if they're the ones doing the thinking, then they're the ones doing the learning. And you can't help but learn when you're engaged. Think of a toddler, if you will, crawling around on the floor or finding something and they have it in their mouth or in their hand and trying to get away from them. They will not let it go. It is very difficult to get a toddler or a small child to let go of something that they have found because they want to know about it. They want to know how it smells, how it tastes, how it feels, and they don't want to give it to you. And so because they are engaged in whatever they have in their hand, they are going to learn about it. You just can't help it. And so one of the things, especially as new teachers, that I have found is helping you understand and learn how to get the teaching or the learning to become the students. So I can teach them all day long, but if they're not learning, then I'm not doing my job. So preventing really is allowing or creating that space where they can feel safe to make mistakes, where it is encouraged to make mistakes, where they feel like they can share their ideas and they're going to be listened to and accepted. And then where they can learn from each other. And again, that really is the focus of good engagement strategies. The first thing that we go over when I am talking to my new teachers is how to establish expectations. Again, I did not go through the undergrad portion of teaching, so I have no idea what the classes are that you're supposed to take. But in the SPED classes, there was a big portion of our class on establishing expectations and what that looks like. The longer I've been a teacher, the more I realize that really I can have all the expectations I want, but unless my kids agree that those expectations are fair, then they're not going to work. And so instead of expectations, I have learned to call them classroom agreements. Now, I will say that my classroom expectations have not changed. Over the course of my 15, 17 years of teaching, they've pretty much stayed the same, whether I am in the middle school classroom, the high school classroom, or talking to my teachers in the programs that I have and talking to my elementary teachers. I try to make them short, actionable, and positive. I learned a long time ago, less is more. And so I want to establish agreements in our class that the students feel like are fair. What I love about doing this is I can have them work together and come up with classroom rules that they feel like work for them. And then as I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good one. You know, working together, being respectful of each other when we're talking. I can write these things on the board and I can put them in the words that I want to use. And I already have the posters made up because I already knew what I wanted them to get to. So again, those classroom agreements are important because then it becomes, when I am dealing with behaviors, it becomes not about me versus the student. It becomes about how are you as the student meeting these classroom agreements that we have created together. And so it doesn't become a personal attack on me because they're not breaking my classroom rules. These are the agreements that we came together as a class to form. And then also they can take some of that responsibility for how are you as a student not meeting the agreement that we had at the beginning of the class. All right. So I did put another, so anything that is on the infographic that is underlined is a link to either a resource or an article that kind of delves into this a little bit more. I feel like all of us as teachers, like Dr. Turner was saying earlier, there are things that we struggle with and there are things that we are naturally good at. And so I do not want to assume that everyone is good at relationships. That is one of the things I love getting to know my students. I love getting to know the students that are really hard to get to know. Perfect example, I had a kid when I was in Arizona. His dad was legitimately in the Mexican mafia. He did not feel like school was important. He already knew what he was going to do when he got out of school. He planned on quitting early. And so he had no reason to want to be there except that his mom required him to go. And so he was one of my favorite students to figure out. He didn't want to do anything. His goal every day was to get kicked out of class. And so my goal then became, how long can I keep you in class? Because he would either leave on his own or a teacher would kick him out. And so my goal became, how do I form a relationship with this kid to keep him in class? This really came down to the relationship and then even simplifying the classroom agreements that we had come to. But a lot of it came from our procedures and routines. So a procedure becomes a routine. Um, and I cannot stress to you enough the importance of having a procedure for everything. In the BTAP class, the beginning teacher class that I facilitate, we go through, I give you an exhaustive list. It's 3 pages of things that you need to think about to have a procedure for. Everything we think about, the things like entering and leaving the classroom. Maybe you're going to teach high school. I'm like, well, my kids already know how to enter a classroom. They do not. I taught junior English. This was AP level. I had kids come in and they were vaulting over desks. We had to go back out of the classroom and remember how to come into my classroom, how to find the seat and get started. And so sometimes you think that it's common sense for certain things to be done, like that you don't sharpen your pencil in the middle of class. That is an assumption that you cannot make. I guarantee you there will be kids who halfway in class say, oh, can I borrow a pencil? Or, oh, my pencil broke and I need to sharpen it. And they haven't been taking notes or doing the work that you thought that they were doing. So having procedures set up in your class is super important. And the ones that are non-negotiable, they become routine. So when I have something that, we will speak kindly to one another, there is a procedure for our group work. There is a procedure in talking in class, because I will not put up with students being made fun of. I want to hear what each kid has. I love hearing from those students that are on the spectrum who think about things in a little bit different way. And having them speak up and share their opinion. It's so fun to watch the rest of the class go, I had never thought about it that way, and starting to make connections. That's where they feel safe and they can learn from each other. So those procedures and routines are important to introduce early and to practice, even with your high schoolers. I practice every time we have a long weekend. So if there's a 3-day weekend, we practice some of those non-negotiable things. We remember our classroom agreements. We explicitly talk about what those are. Dr. Turner, you're saying earlier about the snow days. If there's a flurry of snow, kids lose their minds, and I don't understand it, even up to the senior year. And so we go over those classroom expectations and those procedures for entering the room, leaving the room, talking, independent work time, all of those things. And so we practice.
Hey, Joanna, just a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to edit this anyway, but give me a second because I want to talk about this for a minute and I don't know how to get this thing to work again. Hold on. Give me just a second because I think that is so important. Not that the other things didn't say were important too, but I'm just trying to figure out how to get in here. Like I said, I can edit this out.
You're fine. I trust you.
Let's see. Well, I don't think I got that right. Hold on. See, every time, this is going to be neat software. It's just I've got to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, when you get it all edited, I'd love to see it.
Well, I will. I'll get back to that's one thing, is that as you were talking, what I can do is when I go back is that like even when you make a point, Joanna, it has the ability to go through and do like a pop up, and so I thought that's what I would do is as you go through and mention something, then I'll have it pop up. I'll have to figure out how to do it. But I saw that on the sales or on the sales pitch thing that it would do that. I just need to figure out how to do it. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it this way. This is not the way I would normally do it. But like I said, I'm going to have to edit this anyway. It'll be fine. But Joanna, one of the things that you talked about there that I think is again, most of my career was with high school kids. There were times when I was principal that I was over elementary through high school, but as a teaching career, and you talked about that practice piece. And one of the things that I think as a principal I saw that I never saw as a teacher is that kids understand the expectation of the teacher, and it takes practice. But what used to really be fascinating to me as a principal, I'm coming into all the classrooms, I'm getting to visit them all, and just seeing how students behave differently. uh, the same student behaves differently in one class as compared to another. And again, that was all an example of the reflection of the expectation of the teacher and how they respond. And that might be something as simple, Joanna, as there were teachers that say, before you comment, raise your hand and I'll call on you. And I'd see a student, let's say John Turner, in this classroom, and when the teacher said, when it's time to speak, you raise your hand, and John would do that. And then a couple hours later, I would see John Turner in a classroom where the teacher had more of a freewheeling dialogue process, and see that same student realize that you don't have to raise your hand in this class, but still be able to engage in the classroom. And I think, and I love the point that you pointed about, is that we think, especially by the time they get to middle school or high school, they know how to behave in school. But what we forget sometimes, they don't know what your expectation is as a teacher and how it's different for you. Yeah, they probably know in their heart what is a way to be respectful and kind and treat others in an appropriate manner. But again, the expectation of the teacher is very, very different. And I loved that you emphasized that, Joanna, because it's something that, as a principal, I got to see all the time that I think sometimes the teachers didn't see. And again, knowing that it's worth the practice, I guess is what I'm saying, is that, like you said, you think that they should know how to do this, but what we're trying to practice on is what your expectation as a teacher is, and this is the way that I want you to behave. And another thing that you'd said earlier that I really appreciate, and I've seen this a lot in classrooms recently, I still do a lot of student teacher visits, is that when those expectations can be on I was in a classroom at Westport Elementary here in Springfield the other day, and the in the middle of the year. So, I mean, it was probably different. It had been August or September, but in the middle of the year. And there was something going on in the class, and I saw the teacher as they were talking, and they simply went over and tapped the wall, and there's the expectations there. And that was all they had to do. It was expectation number three. He didn't even say expectation number three. He didn't go through and readdress what expectation number three was. He just went over and pointed at three. The kid knew what was going at, and we moved on. And there
Mhm.
wasn't that. I don't know how to describe it to you, but there wasn't that. So many times I see when people are trying to modify behavior, the process of modifying the behavior can take many more minutes than than the 2 second behavior that caused us to get off track. And like I said, I was really impressed by this teacher just going over, tapping on the wall on the expectation that had been violated. The kid got the message, and we moved on. But again, knowing that was in the middle of the year, and so again, they. I guess what I'm saying there is they'd obviously practiced that a lot because the kids knew what the expectation was, and even a tap on that poster on the wall could rechange behavior. So anyway, I just wanted to drop those in, and I appreciate your comments so much.
No, I love that. Going back to those establishing expectations or those classroom agreements, I tell my new teachers, really, you should have no more than 5 to 7. I try to keep it at 3 to 5. 5 is kind of my magic number. 5 is easy to remember. 5 is one hand that doesn't seem overwhelming to a kid at whatever age. And so keeping them short and positive, and again, we're going to talk a little bit later about rewarding the behavior you want to see. All of the classroom agreements should be stated in a positive way. So it's not what I am not going to do, it is what I want them to do. Again, I encourage you for these classroom agreements to be your non-negotiables. What is it that you like, whether I'm in a good mood, a bad mood, I got sleep, I didn't get sleep, I had my coffee, I didn't get my coffee, whatever it is, whatever causes your day to go up or down, what are the non-negotiables for your classroom? I love in my BTAP classes at the very beginning of the year, they wrote down what their ideal classroom would look like. And we have revisited those after the winter break. And so many of them have changed what their ideal classroom would look like. And so that helps to navigate those classroom agreements when I can say, these are my non-negotiables. Again, sometimes it's practice. I didn't have a lot of these set in stone until about my 5th to 7th year of teaching. I kind of changed some here or there. Sometimes we'd have to add one or two, But again, most of my classroom agreements could stay the same. It was my procedures and routines that I had to amp up in order and practice in order to make sure that those classroom agreements could be followed easily. I love how you said that every teacher is different. What may be a non-negotiable for me is a negotiable for you. I love, even though I'm a type A person, I love that moment when I have given short instructions and I say, okay, do it. And there's that murmur of kids in the classroom. Or when when I first was in the classroom, we did junior research papers. And, we go to the typing lab. There was a computer lab because we didn't have one-to-one then. And, I'd say, okay, here's where you are. This is what you're doing today. Go. And you hear the click, 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 click. I love that. I love that sound. And as a teacher, you find that that's what you want to get to. You want to hear the sound of learning. And in order to do that, we have to have those relationships. We have those expectations, where I can just go over. We've practiced enough where I can go and tap the poster. I've done the exact same thing. And we're able just to keep going right on with learning.
And
So getting to that.
I hate to, and I promise after this one I'll
No,
let you
you're
go on.
fine. You're fine.
But a concrete example I saw just this week, Joanna, was I was in a high school. I'd gone to a high school classroom, and the students as they came in the door, I don't know how to describe it. This was a high school classroom, but it was similar to those pouches that we used to have back when all the kids had to have their own calculators in a math class, and it was just a pocket there. And as students were coming in the door, I just happened to notice that all the students took their cell phones out and would drop them in their appropriate 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. There's like 25 on the back of this door there. And as the students came in the classroom, they were dropping their cell phones in those baskets, and they went into class. And I was just there observing or whatever. And then after we got through with the class and the kids were leaving, and I noticed the students. And by the way, this is a person doing student teaching. Okay. And the students, as they were leaving, they all grabbed their cell phone out of the pouch off the back of the door and they leave the class. There was no cell phone dynamic. And let's just say, as a person that visits a lot of classes right now, cell phones seem to be an issue in about 3/4 of the classes I walk in, some kind of cell phone issue. And so but anyway, and so I asked the student teacher, I said, now, is that the school policy? And she said, well, that's not the student policy, but she says, that's my cooperating teacher policy. And there was just no drama, I guess is what I'm just saying, is that the students knew. I mean, it wasn't the school board having to take a vote on that. It was this teacher saying, that this cell phone issue is a non-negotiable in my classroom. When you come in, you drop it in the pouch. And then when you leave, you can get your cell phone out of the pouch. And there was just no drama. And again, this was a student teacher that was working at the elbow of a veteran teacher. But again, it was just another one of those expectations things. Now, I didn't go to a class down the hallway, but I'm just saying I'm in a lot of high school classrooms now, and cell phones are always an issue. And it was really a great example of the expectations of that teacher really changed the dynamics of the classroom. And it was something as simple as saying, when you come in, put your cell phone in the pouch, and when you leave, you can go. And by the way, there was even one point, and I should have asked the question, that the student asked, can I go get my cell phone? And they were on independent study, and the student teacher said yes, they could, and they went and did something on it, but they put it right back in the pouch and came back. And I'm just saying is that classroom expectation on something is a cell phone. Again, the teacher's expectation really played a great role in what was going on in the class, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Funny you should mention cell phones. I actually did not have a cell phone policy in my room except for during testing. I started learning that if I could engage my kids in learning, they didn't need to have their cell phones out. They weren't bored. And so if I could keep them busy, I didn't have to worry about the cell phones, except during tests. I did have a cell phone policy during testing. All right. So what happens then when I do have behaviors? Because I can have procedures and routines. I can have my classroom agreements, but I'm still going to have disruptions. I'm still going to have behaviors that happen. One of the things that I learned was that when I have a relationship with the kid, it helps me deal with the behavior that comes up. So first of all, what I have had to train myself to do. This did not come easily for me. Was to reward the behavior I want to see, especially in the special education classroom or when I was in the gen ed classroom that had special education kids in it. A lot of times we will have a wide range of kids in our class. Some of them didn't get enough sleep last night. Some of them had to babysit their younger brothers and sisters. And that was coming from a 13-year-old having to take care of his 4 brothers and sisters. I've had kids whose dad got arrested the night before. And he came to school that day and he was tired. There's just so many different things. The kid that I was talking about earlier, he did not have a need for school he didn't feel like. So I had to reward the behavior that I wanted to see. Sometimes, and it down there it says prepare for and choose your battles. Sometimes I had to let some things go in order to keep the relationship with the kid. Now, that does not mean that I was a doormat and that I allowed kids to rule my classroom. That is not what I'm saying at all. But there were times when I had to pick and choose what I was going to let go and what I was going to address. Again, going back to those non-negotiables. So let's talk about my kid. And I'm sorry if you have me for BTAP after you graduate, because you're probably going to hear these stories again. But I had a kid who he had a hard time reading. So anytime we were doing something with reading, he would find a way to amuse himself. Mostly that happened when he first walked into the classroom. He felt like if he could get kicked out of class early on, he wouldn't have to do any of the work. It doesn't make sense to us, but that's sometimes how kids' brains work. So I remember one time I was working with a group of students and he was doing this, with his pencil, and looking at him and knowing the kid, I knew that he was about to throw his pencil across the room. That is a non-negotiable for me because that is dangerous, right? And so he had not let it go yet. He was kind of watching me and shaking his pencil. And so before he could throw it, I called him by the name. I'm going to use John again. And I was like, John, are you kidding me? Are you trying to get work done in my class? Look at you holding your pencil. And he looked at me and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I could tell him thinking, does she really think I was holding my pencil to get to work? Or does she know that I was about ready to throw my pencil? Either way, I don't care because he did not throw his pencil. And so I was able to catch him in the behavior that I wanted to see, him holding the pencil, before he let the pencil fly. And then I had to get onto him for that. So sometimes with our kids, with our students, whether they're in kindergarten, 8th grade, or juniors in high school, we have to catch them in the behavior. You'll have some of those kids that come in and they know they're supposed to come in and sit down and get out their piece of paper, and they come in and they sit down, and you have to watch them so you can catch them in the behavior and reward them. And I'm not saying give them a sticker or a piece of candy. Literally, you can just say their name and congratulate them on being a learner and having learning behavior. So again, I go back to my classroom agreements. John, I am so impressed. I can tell that you are ready to learn today. You came in and sat down. All you have to do is get out your piece of paper and you are ready to learn. And so I am rewarding that behavior that I want to see. Also, I have to know that I have to choose my battles. For me, there are days where I know that I'm a little grumpy. There are times of the day, John, you were saying earlier that it was your second hour. Mine was 4th hour, right after lunch. It's like all kids lose their brains. And so I had to prepare myself for that 4th hour, knowing that I was going to see certain behaviors and what was I going to choose to address and what was I going to allow to let go. My general rule of thumb is if they are a danger, if they are a danger to themselves or to others, that's a non-negotiable. That is a behavior I must address. But even into, are they disrupting the learning of others and themselves? If I have those relationships, if I have established my agreements, if I have my procedures and routines, I love how you said sometimes I can just go over, tap the poster and be done with it. There are other times that I'm going to have a kid come out in the hall with me and have a conversation. There may be times I can just get down low and have a quick conversation. Hey, do you need to go get a drink of water before we continue? It seems like you're having a rough day. How can I support you? There have been times where I said, you know what, you talked to me before class, or I've had kids email me, and today when we do our independent work, why don't you just sit in the back, put your head down, and we will get you caught up later. There are just times when I have to choose and prepare for what I'm willing to handle that day. My other preparation comes from knowing how I am going to respond instead of react. If I have 3 to 4 generic and general ways that I am going to respond to behavior, then I don't have to think about it, right? So if I have a kid out of his seat during independent work time, go back to your seat, pick up where you left off. That gives them exactly what I want them to do and my expectation. Go back to your seat, pick up where you left off. Enough blurting out, raise your hand, right? If I have these easy go-to calls to action, if you will, that are easy for me to remember and easy for me to get them back on task, that's what I'm going to use. Again, my tone of voice is serious, but I can still be kind. Sometimes when I am not prepared for those things, I react, and my reactions can be very harsh, which escalates the behavior. I'm trying to de-escalate the behavior. I'm the adult. I need to be able to de-escalate what's happening in my classroom. And so I want to respond instead of react. Again, this is so much easier if you can plan in advance. Here's how I'm going to handle these. There are some great teacher videos, YouTubers, different trainers that you can go to that have some calls to action, ways to easily respond to small disruptions in class that I like to utilize. And then you will find that you have some students who just have patterns of behavior. They are constant disruptions. You know that they're going to happen every day or every other day. And it seems like no matter what you do, these kids are going to cause a disruption in class. When you get to that spot, it's important to understand the why of the behavior. What is happening? Why are they doing it? Is there a routine to this behavior? You will not have to do this with every behavior. You will not need to do this with every kid, but there are going to be some kids or certain times of day that you've just had it. And when you get to that point, you need to be able to go back and say, okay, what do I do now? This is one of those things they teach you in your special education classes if you go through those. But since they don't, I'm going to give you just a little hint into it. And we call it the ABCs. So we're going to look for the antecedent. What is happening right before this behavior occurs? I assigned independent work. We got into groups. We talked about what we were having for lunch that day. It can be a number of things, but you need to start identifying what happens directly before the behavior that you see. You identify the specific behavior. A lot of times behaviors come in chunks. So not only are they out of their seat, they're also yelling out. Not only are they leaving the classroom, but they make, they throw their things across the room before they bolt. So you're identifying the behavior that's there that you're wanting to change. And then you're wanting to identify the consequence. What happens with that kid? And consequence is not the discipline. Consequence is literally what is the result of that behavior. When that behavior happens, what happens to the kid? Do they get out of the work? Are they sent to the principal's office? Do they get to avoid the task? Do they get attention that they're seeking? And so when I look at the behavior, I'm trying to determine what need are they trying to fill? Are they needing some extra attention? I had a kid who, again, read at a first grade level if we were going to do any kind of work, he would rather be the bad kid than the dumb kid. And so he would cause some kind of disruption every single time. If he came in and he thought we were going to do any kind of reading or writing, he would immediately begin disrupting. One of the things that we figured out was that his previous schools, he was just sent out of the room. He was sent to the focus room or the ISS room to do his work, where he could just sit there and do nothing. He would scribble on a piece of paper. He didn't have to do anything. So when he figured out that he was going to have to stay in my classroom, we had to give him a reason to want to stay. Thankfully, I had a little girl in there that had Down syndrome. She was fantastic at reading, but she could not comprehend. So one of the things we did is to pair them up. So the antecedent to his behavior changed. When we're doing reading, I really need you to help her because she can't understand what we're reading. So if you will let her read to you, that would really help me. And then you can help her understand what's happening. He did not realize that in doing that, she was actually reading to him and giving him, filling in a hole that he did not have. But it changed the way he perceived the assignment that we were going to be working on. And so his behavior then changed. Once we got into a routine of that, then he was able to work through some of his uh, insecurities in reading and actually start helping her and sounding out some of the words. So it actually turned out to be a beautiful relationship that worked really well. So again, antecedent, what is happening directly before the behavior? What is the actual behavior that I'm wanting to change? And then why is that behavior happening? What is the consequence? Are they avoiding? Are they attention seeking? There's a list of things that you can go down. And then once we have identified what the behavior is or why they're looking for that or what the behavior is bringing to them, then we identify new ways of getting the behavior I want to see, and we teach that. So if I have a kid who's needing some extra attention, then I'm going to give them that attention, going back up to rewarding the behavior I want to see. I'm going to have them do a problem, and then I'm going to come over and I'm going to celebrate that he has done this problem all by himself. And then I'm going to walk away and let him get another one done. There, again, so many resources, videos, articles, all the things about rewarding the behavior, how to reward without giving stickers, without doing clip charts, without doing candy. How can we reward that behavior? And then how can we identify what we want them to do and actually teach that to our kids?
Are you good?
I think I am. I made it to the end of the infographic. So if you have some questions for me or want me to clarify anything, I'd be happy to do so.
Well, Callie, I wish I could go back to where it was the two of us together, but there's something that has changed on this thing. Let's see, double click to, oh, well, that's probably what I needed to do right there. Now I see, now I can do it. And I just have
Yay!
to figure the software out. But like I said, I can edit
You're
this all up.
good.
Joanna, editing video is something I've done literally decades. So that's not going to be hard. No, I appreciate it so much, Joanna. Um, when we talk about things like this, it can be overwhelming. Like you said, and you've talked about, there's so many resources out there as far as YouTube videos and some great websites, and again, colleagues that you can ask questions about and things like that. And I guess that is one of the takeaways just listening to this again is that part of it is the journey. You and I both are veteran teachers now. There are things that we did our first and second year that we know now not to do, but it was part of the journey. I don't care. Any professor could have told us not to do it. We'd probably still done some of the silly things that we did as far as um, those things, and again, I just always try to encourage people early in their career to remember that conversations and dialogue with other professionals are important because um, uh, again, if we can learn at the elbows of veteran teachers, but we can learn at the elbows of young teachers too. Some of the I remember years ago when I was principal at Kabul, At one point, I had just gotten sort of a, it was not research based. It was just, I think we need to do this. Is that uh, we had we had teachers that had not observed other teachers teach for decades. You know, they'd
Mhm.
started teaching, but they had really not learned anything. And at that time, and this was been in the mid '90s, we were integrating a lot of things as far as new technology, and some of the veteran teachers were really at a disadvantage because the younger teachers were of that technology generation, but the older generation teachers like me, we learned how to use chalkboards, you know, and so that particular challenge that we faced at that time uh, allowed us to go through and I guess say get veteran teachers to go into younger teachers' classrooms to observe how to use technology, for example. But as part of that conversation, the veteran teachers were also able to share areas of expertise that they had that the rookie teachers that may have been great with technology had no idea about things as far as like discipline. And again, it was just one of those things that I always tried to encourage was that collegial dialogue, learning from each other. You don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. And I think that's one of my big concerns now, as I mentioned earlier, is that we don't have opportunities just to have casual conversations and to bat off ideas and strategies. Like I said, here I'm in my 38th year teaching, and I still go out in student teachers' classrooms, and I do not leave a student teacher's classroom that I don't learn something, from someone. And or they'll, I was in a classroom the other day, and they were using a piece of software, and it's like, what is that software? And again, just going into it with that growth mindset, that idea of each kid is going to be different, and it's an opportunity to go through and try to figure it out, and it can be either overwhelming, but it can also be extremely interesting and engaging, trying to figure out what's going to work for that one kid or what's not. I love the example that you talk about when depending on. In fact, I wrote it down. They would rather be the bad kid than the dumb kid, and boy, that's a great takeaway there, because putting yourself in the perspective of the student is if that student in their mind cares about what their peers think more than what they think about the teacher thinks, then that really changes their behavior. Because, like
Mhm.
you said, that misbehavior can entertain the class, and they're more focused on entertaining the class than they are about disappointing you as a person, as an
Mhm.
adult. And again, that's just something that we may learn in college. We may understand those basic. I used to always say when we were working with kindergarten and first grade teachers that they were at a great advantage because every kindergartner and first grader wants to make an adult happy. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be the custodian, it could be the teacher, it could be the lunch lady. They're just focused on that. But when they make that transition to where the peers all of a sudden uh, entertaining them becomes more powerful than making the adults happy in their life, then it makes it really much more challenging to deal with these things. And I just appreciate so many great takeaways that you have there. But again, hoping to for our next generation teachers saying it is a journey. It's something that you learn and you develop. Don't let it get overwhelming. If things get overwhelming, that is a time to engage with people. And again, I understand that it takes a lot of bravery to go through and say, "Hey, I need help." But it's easy, for example, Joanna, to go on your website and see if I can find a resource. It'd take a lot of courage as a rookie teacher to call you. So maybe
Yeah.
that's the next step we need to talk about. So they may be seeing this in class now. They're not in a classroom teaching, but a couple of years from now, they may need to do you. So I know you guys do trainings and things like that, but what advice would you have? Here, I'm a rookie teacher, a second year teacher. I'm having discipline issues. You know, what advice would you give?
So one of the things that I have learned is, or that I hear a lot is, I just don't have time. I don't have time to get on. I have copies, and I have curriculum, and I have testing, and I have all the things. And what I like to encourage them by saying, you don't have time not to. So one of the things that I encourage my veteran teachers and my new teachers is to get out and observe other teachers at least once every 2 weeks. And I'm not saying for the entire class, 10 minutes, pick a time. Hey, you know what? I'm really struggling with having the kids enter my classroom. I teach second grade. I'm going to go up to the sixth grade classroom, and I'm going to watch how they enter. Let's see if I can get some ideas. On the flip side of that, I'm going to ask if they can come in to my classroom, right? Plan it in advance. I love doing these 10-minute pop-ins. I didn't realize that those were okay. When I thought about going to observe a fellow teacher, I felt like I needed to be in there for the whole time. But that's not true. I can go in and take something away. It's the same thing with professional development. Like once you get out of your classes and you still have to take all this professional development, teachers are notorious for being frustrated. It's like, oh, I don't need the professional development. I just need time in my class. But what I tell my teachers is find one thing that you can take away, one thing that you can implement in your classroom that you can tweak to make work for you. I love working with my elementary teachers because some of the stuff that they do, I never would have thought about. Brain breaks, or we call them brain boosts now, right? It's like you getting those brains up and running. I never would have done that in high school. My kids would have laughed me off the stage. And then I started doing it, and I had kids up in the classroom dancing, and I didn't think they would ever do that. We're doing the Sid Shuffle.
Yeah.
And so there's stuff that we can learn from other grades. And that's what I would say is don't be afraid. When you get the keys to your classroom, in your mind, you feel like, okay, I'm a teacher now. I'm supposed to have it all together. No one else thinks that. I guarantee you, your principal does not think that. They want you to ask questions. They want you to come and they want you to clarify. If you ask a question, they give you an answer and it doesn't make sense to you, they want you to ask them again. They want you to ask for help because they would rather you get the help and support you need than they would want to do interviews to find another teacher.
That's
And so
that's exactly
they
right.
want to give you what you need. And so please do not be afraid to ask that you are going to have a mentor teacher your first 2 years. Unfortunately, sometimes we have mentors that are really good, or fortunately, we have mentors that are really good and really supportive and they're in there all the time. And unfortunately, sometimes we have mentors that were just the closest person or they've been there the longest. And so you don't get a lot of support, but there is someone near you that can provide that support, whether it's in your building, your administration. It could be, your mom's best friend that was a teacher. I don't care. There are people out there who want you to be successful and they do not expect you to know everything from the beginning.
Yeah, I love all that. Again, Joanna, that like you said, and to be candid with you, and again, I was a principal for over 20 years, so I was around a long time. And every once in a while, I would get a younger teacher that would come in and say, who can I go watch? But that was really rare. I hardly ever, and I tried to encourage that. And so, as a principal, I would try to build the expectation of this is something I want us to do. Like you said, even if it's just 10 minutes, going in and stepping in somebody else's classroom for 10 minutes and seeing the student that you had a couple of hours ago and see how they're different in a different classroom setting. If nothing else, it's interesting. But again, like you said, it can give you ideas about how to connect. By the way, a lot of that too is coming back saying, "Well, I'm not going to do that."
Right.
It's a learning too. I mean, you learn those things too. But again, I think it's part of that isolation that once we get the keys to our classroom, we build our moat, and then we're going to sink or swim on our own, and that's not healthy. And again, trying to engage with others, observing, getting out there and doing it. As a principal, I'm hoping I'm building a climate that way. But I also understand just the personal reluctance of some people to just come in. But let me just say this as a person that's again probably the oldest person in this classroom, is that I never had a teacher come in and say, "I want to come observe your class," and I was offended. It is a great compliment. I mean, I think it's just a great compliment. I mean, I think we
That's what I
sometimes
was going to say.
yeah, some people sometimes we perceive that as well they're spy. No, you're making that up in your own mind as your reluctance to ask for help. Trust me, nothing makes a veteran teacher glow more than to have someone come in and say, "Can I watch you do this or whatever." Years ago, this is a long time ago, and we'll try to wrap it up here. Is I used to have a teacher named Gail Johnson, and Gail Johnson is still a teacher in Mountain Grove, and just there was nobody quite like her as far as engaging with kids. Like I think Gail's strategy, I think, was very similar to yours, is that kids are hard to be disruptive when they're actively engaged. So kids would leave Gail's class exhausted from engagement, but I would have people go into Gail, and people they'd say, and I'd say, go watch Gail. And they'd go in there and people would come out with a million ideas. It might be as simple as how do I handle a bathroom pass to how do I engage, make reading engage. I mean, it was just, there was always something that they would take away coming out of Gail's classroom. Well, let me tell you what, I'm sure that was a great compliment to Gail that people would say, I come out, and again, knowing that again, people are, teachers are just overwhelming givers anyway. Like you, Joanna, you're not making a nickel more for doing this for me, but I ask you and you say I'm glad to help, and that's just the nature of, I think, of our profession, is that we want to help. So I take advantage of it. Go out and ask for help and observe and engage.
And I would even say that now. So I mean, there was a veteran teacher that I taught with, um, as students in the class right now, and I'm talking directly to your students. When you get into the classroom, you're going to hear things, right? You're going to hear that everyone loves this teacher because you don't have to do anything in his class,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I wanted to know, like, what does that look like though? Like, they loved going into his class, but normally when you find a teacher who really doesn't do anything, they don't love going into his class for very long because they get bored.
Yeah.
But he had great relationships with his kids. So I didn't want to go in and observe him and say, hey, can I come watch your class? Because the kids say that you don't do anything. And I'd like to know what that looks like.
Yeah.
AI is great for being able to put together a little email. So really, I focused on the relationships that he has with kids. Like, hey, as a new teacher to this school, I'd really like to come in and observe kind of like what you do at the beginning of class and how you pair them up to do things. I just love to observe. He was great with it, but that also gave me, because he was the junior history teacher and I was the junior English teacher, gave me some ideas of what to cover in my class to kind of use his curriculum to help supplement my curriculum to be able to teach them how to write. So it ended up that, they were writing a paper for him that he would never grade, but I could use in my class and grade. And then I became the teacher that they loved because I didn't make them write a second paper. I could just use the same paper twice.
Yeah.
So there's ways around things. Like, I love how you said that you can make a veteran teacher feel really good just by finding something. It's like, hey, I've heard the kids talking about how, cool your class is with this. Like, I would love to come in and just sit and just observe you for a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Is there a time I can come in? I have never had a teacher tell me no, that
Exactly.
they didn't want me in their classroom.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And by the way, as a principal, I don't know, you guys may be principals. Is that was one of the things that when I had a young teacher, a beginning first year teacher, when I'd always go through and say, have the students write to you just a note and just tell them you're not. Is just say, as part of the introduction process at the beginning of the year, write me a paragraph who your best teacher is. And
Yeah.
that tells you a lot about a kid on
Mhm.
who they think is their best teacher. I'd say, have every kid in your class write who's your best teacher and why, because through that lens you're seeing what kind of teacher. I'd always go through and emphasize, I'm not talking your favorite, I'm talking your best. Who's your best? And you'd learn a lot about the kids, but you'd also learn a lot about your colleagues too. And again, it gave you that great opportunity to go through and say, Judy Straight, which was a legendary English teacher at Ava, why are the kids always putting down Judy as the best teacher? And again, like you said, going into Judy and saying, Judy, I have so many kids telling me you're the best teacher. Can I come watch for 10 minutes? Let me tell you what, she'll give you a high five, maybe a hug.
Thank you so much for having me come on. I hope that it has been helpful for your students. Again, the links on the infographic hopefully will give them some ideas of things that they can use, but even more than welcome to reach out to me or anyone at the ATLL. We are thrilled when teachers reach out to us. We just want to support teachers.
Appreciate you all you do, Joanna. Again, we've never met in person, but I could
We
tell you,
haven't.
I could tell that as many teachers are, you're a giver and a helper, and I sure appreciate your help. Okay,
My pleasure.
thank you.